That night, Washington seemed to hold its breath. The East Wing door slammed shut. Melania, her face cold, slammed her fist on the table, her voice emphasizing each word. I will not let them destroy my son. Whoever spreads this, I will crush them. But just as she was about to attack in Dallas, Jasmine Crockett launched a counterattack. On reporters' phone screens, a tweet appeared with a blacked-out call log, proving the secret calls from the First Lady's office to silence the press. Immediately, CNN split the screen in parallel. On one side, Melania had just warned about the threat. On the other side, Jasmine had released shocking evidence to the whole country. On one side, absolute power in the White House. On the other, a congresswoman dared to challenge her face-to-face. Everyone asked the question, is this still a family affair, or has it become a new Watergate in the 21st century? To better understand this tense confrontation, let's find out together right now. The East Wing felt like it was holding its breath, but this time it wasn't just a mood. Orders moved fast. A Secret Service supervisor walked the corridor and told agents to lock the side exits and keep staff on the main floor. Radios clicked with short, clipped replies. No chatter, no jokes. A junior aide reached for her phone and got waved off. Devices were to stay in pockets unless cleared. Minutes later, a plain black case rolled in with signal-blocking pouches, and assistants lined up to drop phones inside. Someone asked if there was a drill and got a look that said, "Don't." A press aide tried the East Colonnade door and found it magnetized shut. Red light on. The whole wing slowed to a controlled crawl, like a hospital right before a hard conversation. Inside her office, Melania sat behind the desk with the DNA report flat in front of her. The pages were creased where she'd gripped them, and the untouched glass of water caught the light. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from anger that made her voice come out clean and hard. I will not allow them to destroy my son, she said, each word steady, like she'd rehearsed it all her life. Raymond Hull stood a step back and kept his face neutral, while he suggested holding statements in legal language. She didn't buy it. She wanted action, not drafts. No leaks, no guesses, no sympathy quotes, she said, pushing the report away as if it burned. You control phones, you control doors, and you tell comms nothing goes out without me. The room was quiet except for the faint buzz of the air vent and the scratch of Hull's pen. Charlotte Winslow slipped back from the hallway with a tablet and a look that said trouble. Ma'am, this just came through a secure tip line, she said, turning the screen so they could read it. The message was short and cold. More will come if you hide it. No sender, no header trail that their quick check could find. Hull swore under his breath and asked who else had seen it. Charlotte said only her, and she'd locked the inbox. Melania read it twice, then a third time. Jaw set, eyes dry. They think pressure will scare me, she said, and nodded at Charlotte to start tracing anyway. Hull warned that pushing too hard could make the leak spread faster. But nobody in that office believed standing still was an option. The sense in the room shifted from panic to a plan, and the fight, ready or not, had officially begun. Raymond Hull didn't waste time. By late afternoon, he had a team gathered in a conference room across from the East Wing. The blinds were pulled down tight, the table littered with folders, laptops, and copies of the DNA report that no one dared touch for too long. The room smelled of burnt coffee and stress. Around the table sat 3 lawyers known for handling Washington fires, plus a communications fixer who had a reputation for killing stories before they hit front pages. Hull opened with a blunt line, "This isn't rumor control. This is survival," nobody argued. Everyone had seen the file. Everyone knew it had the weight to do damage if it spread. The lawyers laid out options, most of them thin. One, a sharp-faced man in a gray suit, leaned forward and said what the others were too careful to suggest. We could invoke federal privilege, argue that these are private, protected documents tied to the executive branch. Courts have respected that before. We don't need to win forever, just stall long enough to choke the story. The room went silent. Hull shot him a look, half intrigued, half wary. Using that kind of leverage meant dragging the presidency itself into a scandal that was supposed to be private. But Melania, sitting stiffly at the end of the table, didn't flinch. She tapped the folder with one finger and asked flatly, "How fast could it work?" The lawyer shrugged. "Days, maybe hours. But it leaves fingerprints. People will know we pulled the highest lever. As the discussion circled, Melania broke in with something none of them expected. If we wait on courts and papers, we lose, she said, voice tight but steady. We need names. I want to know who betrayed me. She meant the leak. A second of uncomfortable silence passed before she added, hire investigators. Private, discreet. I don't care the cost. Hull's jaw tightened. Everyone in that room understood what she was really suggesting, bringing in outsiders to dig through staff records, call logs, maybe even personal accounts. That wasn't just aggressive, it was risky, even illegal if they crossed certain lines. But Melania didn't blink. Her eyes swept the table, daring someone to say no. One by one, the lawyers looked down at their notes. It was clear the First Lady wasn't just angry anymore. She was ready to fight, and fight dirty if she had to. The war room wasn't about strategy anymore. It was about survival, and everyone there knew it. In Dallas, Jasmine Crockett's office buzzed like a newsroom on deadline. Phones rang, staff shuffled between desks, and the smell of takeout coffee lingered in the air. Near midnight, her personal inbox pinged with a message that froze the room. The subject line was blank, the sender untraceable, but the attachment was clear, a set of call logs. Marcus Bellamy opened the file and stared at the timestamps. Every entry matched the hours the East Wing had been scrambling to shut down the DNA leak. This isn't a fake, Marcus said quietly. These are real logs tied to actual phone records. Jasmine leaned over his shoulder, scanning each line. It wasn't just chatter. These were calls made to editors, network producers, even a social media executive. The implication was heavy. Melania's office had gone into overdrive to bury the story. Jasmine sat back, exhaled, and said simply, now we know. The room got louder, everyone speaking at once, until Marcus raised a hand. There's more. I've been contacted by someone inside. They're willing to testify, off the record for now, but under oath if it comes to it. They saw the pressure campaign firsthand. The staff went silent. A whistleblower changed everything. It wasn't just a paper trail anymore. It was a voice that could stand before Congress and confirm it all. Jasmine felt the weight shift. For weeks, she'd been painted as chasing shadows, but this gave her something Washington couldn't dismiss. She tapped the whiteboard where names and arrows were already scrawled. Then this isn't just about statements. This is about proof. A countdown starts tonight. Her team watched as she mapped the next move, pacing the floor with her phone in hand. We'll build the case in layers, she said. First, I frame the issue publicly. Secrecy versus accountability. Then we time the witness. We don't blow it all at once. We force them to react. Then we raise the stakes. Marcus scribbled notes while another aide pulled up congressional calendars. Jasmine stopped, looking each of them in the eye. We're not here to speculate anymore. We're bringing someone who saw it, someone who lived it, straight to Capitol Hill. The staff exchanged looks, half nervous, half energized. They all knew once a witness sat in front of a microphone, there was no turning back. The game wasn't just about leaks now. It was about who had the courage to drag the truth into the light, no matter how ugly it got. By the next morning, Washington was buzzing. Staffers who had been near the East Wing the night before whispered about glass breaking and doors slamming. One described hearing a vase shatter. Another swore they saw an aide rush out with red eyes like she'd been crying. Within hours, those details spread through text chains and off-the-record calls with reporters. A producer from Politico leaned into her phone and muttered, "She's cracking," while another journalist at the Post nodded, already drafting a note to his editor. It didn't matter that no one had proof. Rumors in Washington had a way of hardening into fact once enough people repeated them. By lunchtime, anchors were already dropping phrases like explosive outburst into their scripts. Inside the West Wing, Charlotte Winslow walked the hallway with a folder tucked under her arm, only to be stopped by two men in plain suits. They flashed IDs, spoke her name without asking, and guided her into a small side office. The door shut with a click that sounded heavier than it should have. Charlotte sat stiff, clutching the folder, while one of them leaned forward. "We need to know exactly what you've seen and who you've spoken to." It wasn't a question. She nodded nervously, aware this wasn't just an internal check. This was a hunt for a mole. And if they were pulling junior staffers into closed rooms, it meant someone believed the leak hadn't come from the outside. It had come from inside the First Lady's circle. While investigators sniffed around the East Wing, the outside world erupted. On Twitter, hashtags began climbing fast. Hashtag silence or truth and hashtag First Lady files trended side by side. Cable panels split into factions within hours. Some pundits defended Melania as a mother pushed past her breaking point, while others argued that any attempt to silence the press was a violation of public trust. Lawmakers joined the noise too, one senator tweeting that Crockett was reckless, while a congresswoman from the other party fired back, "What's reckless is abusing power to bury evidence." The split was loud, messy, and public. By the end of the day, the story wasn't just about DNA anymore. It was about whether the East Wing was hiding the truth or whether the truth was about to swallow them whole. The East Wing was no longer just tense. It felt like a war bunker. Lights blazed through the night, aides hunched over laptops, printers spitting out drafts that were shredded minutes later. Every corner hummed with nervous energy. By sunrise, the plan was locked. Melania would step in front of cameras at noon, live, no edits, no buffer. Raymond Hull insisted it was the only way to regain control. Show strength, show calm. But while one team rehearsed lines about dignity and protecting family, another team quietly played a dirtier game. Hull had signed off on a stack of cease and desist letters from one of the most feared law firms in Washington. The instructions were blunt. 3 major outlets, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and a rising digital powerhouse, were to bury the DNA story or face lawsuits that would bleed them dry. It should have been a show of force. Instead, it backfired within hours. One of those outlets leaked the letters themselves, and by mid-morning, every news chyron screamed the same headline. First Lady threatens free press. Commentators compared it to Nixon. Others called it panic in pearls. The very act meant to silence had made the story bigger, darker, and impossible to ignore. In the press bullpen, a young journalist muttered to her colleague, "She just handed Crockett the moral high ground on a silver platter." Meanwhile, in Dallas, Jasmine Crockett played her hand with surgical precision. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't call cameras. Instead, her staff sent a tightly worded memo to select reporters, the kind that spreads faster than a virus. Congresswoman Crockett to present documentation during Appropriations Subcommittee hearing regarding potential misuse of taxpayer funds linked to media suppression. The words were vague but explosive, pointing directly at something bigger than DNA, a potential abuse of federal money. Within minutes, screenshots of the memo flooded Twitter. Pundits speculated, did she have receipts, emails, witnesses? Jasmine herself stayed quiet, which only made the preview louder. Inside the East Wing, the leak of the cease and desist letters sent Melania into a fury. She slammed her fist on the desk, demanding to know who in their circle was feeding the press. Charlotte Winslow, pale and exhausted, reminded her that even law firms leaked, sometimes on purpose, to build pressure. Melania's eyes narrowed. Then we find who benefits. Because whoever did this wants me boxed in when I walk out there today. Back on Capitol Hill, Jasmine's allies whispered of something even bolder. Word spread that she had secured a whistleblower, someone inside the communications chain, willing to testify in closed session. The detail hit like a jolt of electricity. A source at CNN tweeted cryptically, "This won't just be about contracts. A witness is ready." That single line trended within minutes, giving the countdown a heartbeat the whole city could hear. By noon, Washington felt like it was holding its breath. Networks ran split-screen coverage. On one side, the podium in the White House press room, polished and ready. On the other, a committee hearing room on the Hill. Staffers setting out microphones for what should have been a dull budget discussion. Instead, scrolling banners shouted, "First Lady versus Congresswoman," showdown hours away. Commentators filled the gap with speculation. Would Melania lean into motherhood and paint herself as a victim? Or would she go on the offensive and brand Jasmine as reckless? Would Jasmine actually drop evidence? Or was she bluffing to rattle the East Wing? Nobody knew, but everyone agreed on one thing. The fight was no longer about DNA. It was about power, credibility, and who could seize the narrative before the other made her move. The White House briefing room was packed shoulder to shoulder, cameras stacked on tripods like rifles aimed at a target. Melania walked in right on the dot of noon, her heels clicking against the marble, her expression a mask of calm. She adjusted the microphone with deliberate slowness, scanning the room as though daring anyone to interrupt her. Her statement started soft, almost tender. She spoke of family, of motherhood, of the pain of seeing private matters twisted into political weapons. But her tone sharpened halfway through, eyes narrowing at the cameras. "I will say this clearly," she declared, her accent cutting every syllable sharp. "Anyone who spreads lies will face consequences." The room went dead quiet for a beat. No one missed the threat behind her words. It wasn't just about protecting her son anymore. It was about warning the entire press corps and, indirectly, Jasmine Crockett herself. She ended without taking questions, pivoting off the podium and exiting through the side door. Reporters shouted after her, flashes popping, but she didn't flinch. Within seconds, however, the narrative slipped out of her control. Phones buzzed across the press room, journalists glancing down at their screens as a single tweet from Jasmine Crockett exploded onto timelines. "If this is about lies, then explain these calls." Attached was a blurred-out image of call logs, names blacked out, but dates and times clear. They matched perfectly with the hours when editors and producers had quietly confirmed receiving pressure from the East Wing. Gasps rippled through the reporters still seated, some bolting out the door to file updates. What had been a clean, emotional pitch from Melania was instantly undercut by Crockett's evidence drop. CNN didn't wait. Producers split the screen in real time. On the left, Melania's press conference replay, her warning about consequences echoing through the speakers. On the right, Jasmine Crockett's tweet, enlarged on screen, anchors circling the timestamps with digital markers. "We are now seeing two very different realities," the anchor said gravely. Other networks followed, cutting between the White House feed and live shots of Jasmine walking into the Capitol, her phone in hand, cameras swarming her as she smiled faintly but said nothing. The clash wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was happening in real time. Two narratives colliding on live television, each undermining the other in front of millions. For Washington, this was no longer a scandal. It was a showdown. The Rayburn hearing room was supposed to be quiet that morning, just another routine subcommittee session with half-empty chairs. Instead, it was standing room only. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras fought for position, and staffers whispered as Jasmine Crockett took her seat. She looked calm, almost casual, but the stack of papers in front of her made the room hum with expectation. When it was her turn, she leaned into the microphone, her voice steady but charged. "Transparency isn't an option in a democracy. It's the requirement. And when leaders use their position to bury the truth, it becomes our job to bring that truth into the light." Then came the first strike. She held up a printed timeline of call logs, each date and time highlighted. These are calls made from the East Wing, each within hours of the DNA report surfacing. Calls not to family, not to lawyers, but to media executives and editors. Pressure was applied. "The record is right here." Gasps rippled across the chamber as she laid the pages down. Before the noise settled, she produced a second document, an email stamped with an aide's signature subject line. "Stop the presses." The language was blunt. "No outlet is to run this. Shut it down." Jasmine let it hang in the air before sliding the page across to the clerk. Reporters' pens scratched like thunder. The final blow came not on paper, but in words. Jasmine glanced around the room, her tone lowering. "And there is a witness. Someone who saw this suppression firsthand. They will testify in closed session, under oath, that broke the room wide open." Audible gasps, a few murmurs of, "Oh my God." The chair of the subcommittee, visibly rattled, tapped his gavel and announced, "Given these materials, this committee will immediately consider an informal review of the First Lady's office communications." It wasn't a full investigation yet, but it was the first step, a spark that could burn into a fire. Across town in the West Wing, Melania sat rigid in a high-backed chair, eyes glued to the live feed. The camera froze on Jasmine holding up the damning email, her words replaying in captions at the bottom of the screen. Melania's hands tightened on the armrests until her knuckles went white. "She wants war," she whispered, almost to herself. Around her, aides stayed silent, too afraid to move. The First Lady's fury had shifted into something colder, sharper. The moment Jasmine dropped evidence, the line between private scandal and public battle vanished. Melania wasn't just reacting anymore. She was preparing to strike back. The West Wing felt like it was vibrating with tension. Melania sat with her arms crossed, staring at the television, replaying Jasmine's testimony on loop. "Then we sue her," she said flatly. "Defamation. She accused me of abusing my office." The room went still until Raymond Holt cleared his throat, his voice careful but firm. "Ma'am, if we file suit, we open ourselves up to discovery. That means call logs, emails, drafts, everything we've tried to contain becomes evidence. That's exactly what she wants." Melania's jaw tightened, eyes fixed on the screen. She didn't like being told no, but she knew Holt was right. One wrong move and Jasmine's accusations wouldn't just be sound bites, they'd be proven fact in court. While Melania debated her next strike, the Justice Department dropped a shock of its own. Charlotte Winslow, the young aide who had quietly managed much of the East Wing's correspondence, received a subpoena to appear before a federal grand jury. The order came without warning, delivered by 2 U.S. Marshals at her apartment door before sunrise. By noon, every network had the story. First Lady's aide called to testify. For Melania, it was a gut punch. The fight wasn't just on TV anymore. It had crossed into the legal system. Behind closed doors, Charlotte's testimony could confirm the very things Jasmine had hinted at, and Melania knew she couldn't control what a scared staffer might say under oath. Then came the second leak, and it hit like a bomb. A video clip surfaced online, grainy but clear enough. It showed a late-night call inside the East Wing, with a senior advisor snapping at a staffer. "I don't care how you do it. Just stop the presses. Kill the story before morning." The clip raced across social media, played on loop across MSNBC and CNN. Anchors leaned forward, voices low and dramatic. One banner cut straight to the chase. "This is Watergate 2.0? The phrase trended instantly. The story was no longer about a leaked report or even about a press conference. It had become a battle over credibility at the highest level of power. And now both sides knew. Words alone wouldn't save them anymore. By the end of the week, Washington couldn't pretend this was just another headline. The Speaker's office announced that Congress would hold a public hearing with the whistleblower Jasmine had teased. Cameras would be allowed, transcripts published in full. The message was unmistakable. No more whispers, no more closed doors. This fight was moving into the sunlight. Reporters swarmed the Capitol steps, asking which committee would lead, how soon testimony would begin, and whether subpoenas would follow. For the first time, the scandal wasn't just chasing Melania, it was chasing the institution around her. Inside the East Wing, the fracture lines spread fast. One of Melania's top lawyers resigned abruptly, citing irreconcilable differences. Staffers whispered that he had warned her against stonewalling, only to be ignored. Another advisor leaked word that multiple aides were quietly seeking their own legal counsel, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire without protection. What had once been a tight inner circle now looked like a dam breaking, loyalty crumbling, self-preservation taking its place. Melania tried to project strength, but behind closed doors, even Holt admitted the obvious. The team was bleeding out, and no one could stop it. Jasmine, meanwhile, seized the narrative with precision. Sitting across from a primetime anchor, she leaned forward and delivered the line that cut through all the noise. This was never about a child. It was about power. Within minutes, the hashtag #PowerNotChild trended nationwide, picked up by activists, comedians, even late-night hosts. The framing was sharp, unassailable. Melania was fighting as a mother, but Jasmine had reframed the battle as a test of democracy itself. Public opinion polls showed independents swinging hard toward Jasmine's side, not because they liked her, but because they didn't trust a cover-up. The final image that week wasn't staged, but it burned into memory. On CNN, a split screen showed Melania sitting stiffly at the White House, her jaw tight as Jasmine spoke live from the Capitol steps. Two women separated by miles but locked in the same frame, glaring through the lens as if they could see each other. What started as a family scandal had become a national trial of transparency versus secrecy, accountability versus control. For millions watching, it no longer mattered what the DNA report said. What mattered was whether America still had the courage to look its leaders in the eye and demand the truth. The hearings didn't end the fight. They only opened the next chapter. Washington moved on as it always does, but the scars remained. Melania retreated further into silence, her public appearances carefully staged, her words filtered through layers of handlers. For her, the cost wasn't just political, it was personal, a legacy reshaped by whispers she could never fully erase. Jasmine, on the other hand, stepped into a brighter, harsher spotlight. She was praised as fearless and condemned as reckless, but no one could deny she had shifted the conversation. From cable news panels to kitchen tables, people debated not just the scandal, but what leaders owe the public when the truth feels inconvenient. The phrase she coined, "This was never about a child, it was about power," ended up etched into the year's political lexicon, a shorthand for standing up when silence would have been easier. In the end, this wasn't about winners or losers. It was about the country catching a glimpse of how fragile trust can be and how fierce the battle becomes when secrecy collides with accountability. The image of those two women on split screen, one clinging to control, the other pushing for transparency, remains a reminder that history doesn't wait for comfort. It demands answers, even when the truth cuts too close. If this story gripped you, don't let the conversation end here. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Whose side would you have taken and why? Was this a fight about family, or was it always about power? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of these high-stakes confrontations. Together, let's keep pulling back the curtain on the stories they'd rather you never heard.